All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to today's quarterly FOREWARN meeting, which will be focused on heat waves. Please do feel free to pop your name and your organisation in the chat and say hello to everybody. We're really keen that this is a space for discussion, so go ahead and introduce yourself. Just before, there is interpretation available for the meeting today. So as I say at the bottom, there's a small globe icon. You can listen to the meeting in French if you want to join the French channel there. And for those who've just joined us, please do feel free to pop your name, your organisation into the chat, say hello to everybody. Hopefully we'll have a lot of live discussion today. So yeah, all right, so just to talk quickly through the agenda for the day, we'll start with welcome and opening remarks. We'll then hand over to Christine Murphy from Start Network, who will talk to us about some of the previous Start Fund alerts that we've had for heat waves and how to do meal for anticipation action for heat waves. We'll then hand over to a colleague from Vietnam, who will talk to us about the Red Cross forecast-based financing work on heat waves in Hanoi, and focusing particularly on heat waves in urban contexts. We'll then speak in a little bit more detail about heatwave modelling and response in Pakistan. And hopefully at the end there, we'll have some time for some open discussion for any questions that you might have. But as we go along, do feel free to pop questions into the chat. Our speakers are all online, so they should be able to respond to you as we go. And also there should be time for some questions at the end of each presentation as well. All right, so I think hopefully we should have Sumera with us today. So Sumera is the executive manager of the Health and Nutrition Development Society, or HANS, in Pakistan. And she's also the co-chair of the Heatwave Technical Working Group in Pakistan. So Sumera, I think you're on the line, so over to you.
Yes, Milli, I'm online. Thank you so much. And very good morning, everybody. Most of you know me. I'll just put off the camera because we are in a workshop as communicated to you. We are in a drought workshop. So to have good signals, I'm just putting off the camera and I'll, give my welcome note to everybody. A very good morning to you, and I'm really honored to welcome you all on this FOREWARN quarterly meeting. I am Sumera Javeed, as Milli told, and I'm working with HANS. It's a local NGO, and it's been evolved in 42 years as one of the largest not-for-profit organizations in the country, and HANS has both integrated development approach and disaster management expertise. HANS is also co-chairing Heatwave Technical Working Group of DRF Ready Pakistan. HANS is also part of the START Network, which is a group of more than 50 civil society organizations, which are local and international, large and small, set up to bring change to our centralized, slow and reactive humanitarian system. Anticipatory action has always been part of START's network DNA, and the network has been pioneering proactive approaches since 2016. Keeping all this in mind, a locally led humanitarian system, which has begun putting into practice and by enabling the formation of locally led hubs, which are the collectives of local, national, and international agencies operating in the same country or the region, we are also heading towards the establishment of Ready Hub for Pakistan. As you all know, that the importance and the benefit of anticipatory actions is extremely important and is becoming a reality through the local organizations and with the support of START Network. And the locally led humanitarian system is accountable to the people affected by and at risk of crisis. And the locally led approaches are aiming to make the way humanitarian aid is approached and delivered by shifting the power and decentralizing the decision making at the locally led networks and organizations. For example, in Pakistan, through this DRF and Ready Pakistan funding, we have approached 9.5 million beneficiaries and from 570,000 GBP in last 2 years. So this was all possible through the locally, engaging the local organizations, and we have two very good models for heatwave anticipatory responses. One was from HANS. It was done in 2020, and recently in 2021, the response was done by BSDSP in Balochistan. So they have different, very good learnings. We have the CAP survey and the impact assessment, which showed us that there had been well-recognized anticipatory response, which really helped people affected by the heat waves. At my experience, communities at risk are the best place to prioritize and monitor the risks, decide triggers, and can help to determine who needs what support and when. Ultimately, this work must be owned by the local organization at the local level, and it needs to be effective and sustainable in this way. And if we want to take the anticipatory actions to scale, then we need to integrate the many networks of local actors in Pakistan who have in-depth knowledge and lived experience, as we have the different national level and international level humanitarian organizations networks working in Pakistan. And in all this anticipatory action process, the role of obviously the role of civil society and their networks, academia, scientists, and humanitarian actors is of vital importance. And currently we have 3 technical working groups for heat waves, drought, and floods respectively. But we are having one more technical working group that would be regarding academia that will be formed, and its TORs have been prepared, and this will be finalized in our National Steering Committee meeting next month. And through this technical working group, the scholarships and the internships would be offered for the research to different universities and the students. So we are going ahead for this as well. And we do understand that the anticipatory actions have been of key importance, due to which the risk is reduced for the predictable disasters. And it is to ensure that the local communities determine which risk should be prioritized and what anticipatory actions can be put in place to mitigate these risks. But ultimately, locally led anticipatory action is not just about linking the financing mechanism to the local actors, though it is important, but it's about the decision, who decides the actions, who owns, and who leads the risk financing strategy. So this is the exciting thing about the risk financing system, that they are organized in advance, and so we have time to enable new forms of coordination and leaderships from the local communities. We need this more than ever. So with all this anticipatory, introduction and the work we have done in Pakistan, I'm again so thankful for listening, all of you, for listening me so patiently. And once again, everybody, you are all welcome, greatly welcome to join this meeting. And thank you so much. Over to Milli.
Great, thank you so much, Sumera. Thank you for setting the scene so clearly for us. And also thanks for joining. I know you're very busy with the drought workshop today, so thank you for that. And we will hear a little bit more about some of the work that's happening in Pakistan with Start Network later on today. So just moving on to a quick overview of FOREWARN for those who aren't familiar. So FOREWARN is the forecast-based warning, analysis and response network. The FOREWARN community is all of you who've joined today and everyone who's interested in working in anticipation and working towards early action. The goal of FOREWARN is to take the high quality information that's shared and produced by the FOREWARN community and to translate that into improving the quality of anticipation work. That's through anticipation alerts to the Start Fund, through early action coordination, through policy, advocacy and dialogue, and through sharing and learning. As a programme, FOREWARN supports both Start Fund and Start Ready at the Start Network. And through the national pilots, which are actually coming to the end of the pilot phase, and we will be sharing, hopefully, lots of learning from an evaluation of this phase, and it's moving into a programme phase. But through these national programmes, work is focused on advocacy and engagement, on the development of national expert groups, and you heard Sumera talking a little bit about those in Pakistan, and those feed into the global thematic groups. Also working on tools and early action plans for raising anticipation alerts based on independent triggers. And you can see here as well, there are a few pots of money available. Those are for different groups of people, and they're under review at the moment, and we hope to share some more information about those soon. Oops. So here you have a slide which just shows you the different members of our team. We're based in 4 different countries at the moment, and hoping to expand into Nepal soon. And everybody on this slide should be in the chat. So if you have any questions for the team, please feel free to pop those into the chat and they'll be able to respond to you. Okay, so moving on now, just to some updates from the national FOREWARN programmes. Unfortunately, due to maternity leave and due to other circumstances, we only have updates from the Philippines and from Madagascar today. But hopefully this should give you a little insight into what the teams have been working on since our last update in earlier in the year.
Hello everyone, we're happy to share with you the latest updates from National FOREWARN in the Philippines. So first, our internship program is now up and running, and we now have graduate level interns for 3 of our projects. The first is for the enhancement of our rainfall-induced landslide study. This is in partnership with the University of the Philippines Los Baños School of Environmental Science and Management. The second is for our DRF system build. We have an intern working on developing its communication strategy. Third one is for our dengue risk analysis project. We have 2 PhD students who are continuing the study. And on MOU development, our MOU with the University of the Philippines Resilience Institute has now been signed by the university president and by START Network, while our MOU with UP Los Baños is now almost ready to be signed by their chancellor. And on FOREWARN members' participation in DRF governance bodies, we have 1 representative of FOREWARN in our DRF governance team, while we have 2 FOREWARN experts as members of our DRF technical working group for tropical cyclones. And FOREWARN has also supported the successful activation of the anticipation alert for disease outbreaks in Bohol and Negros Occidental. This project was implemented by Humanity and Inclusion, Relief International, and MDM, and we've also conducted the field monitoring visit of this AA implementation. And START Network, together with the Office of Civil Defense, is co-lead of the revamped Learning and Evidence Technical Sub-Working Group of the AA Technical Working Group. And START is also co-organizer of the AA preparatory meeting for the GPDRR. This is along with Anticipation Hub, IFRC, and FAO. And we're also working on the finalization of the AA declaration for the GPDRR. That's all from National FOREWARN in the Philippines. Thank you very much.
I believe now that I'm handing over to Sehen or Anthony from FOREWARN in Madagascar. So over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Milli. Again, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our meeting today. Well, the topic is today for the heat wave. We are in Madagascar at the end of the cyclone season. So what we are sharing with you today is the update from the pilot on cyclone anticipatory actions in Madagascar. So for that, as you might have heard, Madagascar has been affected by 6 cyclone systems during 3 months along this season. The initial forecast has predicted around 2 to 3 systems, but the country has been affected by more than the forecast. START Network members have been able to submit and to activate the alert for cyclone anticipatory and response actions 4 days ahead of for the first major cyclone and 2 days ahead for the second major ones. On this current month, an impact assessment is held, and the outputs from that assessment are not yet finalized, but we can share a few main points of the key findings. From START Network members, one of the key advantages of the pilot is the rapidity of the system within 5 hours, and the pilot is part of the quickest trigger process that we have now. Though some suggestions have been received on how to improve the flexibility of the mechanism in terms of the time lead and the area of intervention. Those are just a few examples of the key findings from that we've got from members. Can we go for the next slide, please? In the other side, the government and the non-government institutions that have been involved in the experience of this pilot, some findings have been also identified. The first of the findings is related to the needs of any technical capacity strengthening of the risk information and of the vulnerability data. The second finding is related to the coordination, mostly on the communication between members and the government institutions. And the final finding is related to the integration of the anticipatory actions in the National Contingency Plan for Madagascar. Next slide, please. Apart from the cyclone, the drought anticipatory actions through the forecast-based financing, forecast-based action has also advanced with the finalization and the validation of the early action protocols with 4 districts in the southern of the country. The existence of a national reference document on anticipatory actions also marks a major step in advocacy in Madagascar, and that document integrates the coordination with humanitarian actors, but also and especially with the government entities. About the start ready, it is not yet implemented in Madagascar, like for the other countries, but we are working with members on how to proceed with that mechanism soon. And start ready will consider 3 major risks maybe for Madagascar, like the cyclone, the floods and the drought. It will be decided with members as long as we go with the process. Thank you so much for listening, and we are remaining available for any questions or any remark for that. Thank you so much, and over to you, Milli.
Thank you, Zahen. It's great to hear the update from Madagascar there as well. If anybody does have any questions on any of the updates that have just been presented from the different national forewarns, please do feel free to pop those into the chat. As I said, everyone is online and available to respond to any questions. So moving now to the focus of the meeting, to heatwaves. We have Christine Murphy with us today to talk about heatwave funding through the START Fund. Christine is the MEAL advisor for the Crisis Anticipation and Risk Financing team at START Network. Christine, just a reminder that we do have interpreters with us today, so yes, a gentle pace would be great. Over to you, thanks.
Thanks, Milli, and thanks everyone. So I wanted to approach specifically heatwave funding through the START funds, as much of the recent heatwave activity from the START network has been channeled via the Disaster Risk Financing Program in Pakistan. So in this very short summary, I just wanted to look at some of the data from START Fund heatwave related alerts, as well as some of the challenges that come up when assessing the impact of a heatwave mitigation project. So it'll just be a very quick summary. Next slide, thank you. So as we can see, generally, there are kind of established thresholds for heat wave, which are for general short periods of intense heat. These vary from country to country, but as a general rule, by the WMO, heat waves occur when the daily maximum temperature exceeds average maximum seasonal temperatures by more than 5 degrees Celsius for more than a consecutive number of days, and that's normally around 5 days. For START Fund's heatwave projects, however, anticipation has been for extended hot periods rather than technical heat waves, these short-term heat waves. The reason we know this is that the strength or confidence from a forecast would be unlikely to confirm a heat wave for up to 50 days, which is the average length of heat waves that have been anticipated through the START Fund. This is a key example of where START Fund treatment of heat wave can really vary from other definitions and doesn't necessarily need to adhere to the exact technical definition. For START Fund heat wave projects, which have all been in Pakistan, heat waves, as I said in the alert notes and in the reports, have been lasting between 45 and 60 days. So really it's more an indication of a period of extreme hot weather rather than necessarily a technical heat wave. On the next slide, as we can see here, with the first y-axis indicating people affected per the alert note, and the second y-axis showing the amount of funding available. The cost per recipient has really varied in heatwave programming. However, generally it has been a very, very low cost per person due to the types of activities that are generally selected. An ongoing challenge with understanding the impact of heatwave projects is the perceived lack of change that can be generated through your project. For example, in the recent heatwave alert in India, alert 520, this was actually cited as a reason for non-activation. From past alerts, affected populations have been, or targeted populations have been up to 50% of the relevant region, and the small cost per person has kind of worked to reduce the perceived value of the project in the eyes of decision makers. Especially where mass communication strategies are utilised. On the next slide, a cost of 26 pence per beneficiary can appear to devalue the understanding of the project. However, when looking at the average cost of a heatwave kit in Pakistan from a recent alert, which contained a hat, water bottle, oral rehydration solution, etc., those came in roughly at £12 GBP per person. So reaching the same high population with physical protection kits might obviously run the risk of taking the alert out of the Start Fund small to medium scale niche. If agencies have the ability to target and prioritise in order to generate accurate and convincing figures of a significant number of affected people without relying too much on these quite inflated communication numbers, this could really help to demonstrate the reality of the vulnerable population to decision makers. A mass communication project can be seen as not effective or not generating enough of a change, whereas a physical intervention, if we're using the average Start Fund intervention cost of £300,000, might be deemed too limited due to the high cost per beneficiary. So a recommendation to increase activation of heatwaves in the Start Fund would be to use close and justified targeting, and to be clear on direct protection targeting, potentially splitting that away from communication numbers and treating them as two separate populations. The next slide goes through the second kind of example of a trend that we saw, which was that while an extended hot period was being forecast, as I said, an average of 51 days in the 4 alert notes that we received, lead times before the forecast was very limited. The first y-axis, the lead days is at the highest. It's 12 days for an alert in India, but was either 2 days or 0 days for Pakistan alerts. CAP studies, which were conducted by Hans, Sumera mentioned in her introduction, and ACF last year in Pakistan indicate that people take on messaging most effectively in the forecast period of extreme heat, with people more likely to change their behaviour if messaging is received in advance. However, because of these short lead times, agencies are not often given the opportunity to do so. Obviously, where there is a trigger, such as with DRF, then it's not possible for agencies to make this internal decision to raise an anticipation alert earlier. However, for heatwave projects through the Start Fund, perhaps by developing an internal agreement point for when a Start Fund anticipation alert can be raised, can help to ensure that the action of the project is as effective as possible. The other component is that in alert notes, the period of forecast extreme heat is around 50 days. And yet projects are primarily focused on awareness raising and mass communication, and they rarely reflect the physical impact of a vulnerable population, such as casual daily wagers, through livelihood support or health provision. So perhaps linking proposed activities a bit more to this long duration and the impact that that would have on the vulnerable population could be really valuable in continuing to use the Start Fund to its best advantage for heatwave activations. The next slide, which is a bit more about how we are currently measuring success of heatwave projects. So aside from the alerts themselves, trying to understand the impact of a heatwave project or how we are measuring success or change can be a bit of a challenge. Most activities are awareness raising and communications, and therefore the majority of the data that we have is generated through CAP studies, which is obviously the most effective way of understanding whether messages have been retained, taken on board, or remembered. But while these are really valuable, they can contribute to the perception of heatwave projects not having measurable changes. This can be really challenging due to a lack of or misinterpreted health data, such as reduction in heat stroke cases where the data is really not available in Pakistan, or it can be misreported in other areas due to short-term forward mortality displacement, where people who are sick already perhaps have earlier mortality. However, a key learning from Alert 237, which was in Pakistan and was a consortium project, was to have activities that were informed by the population instead of having a blanket approach to heatwave programming. And so in using baseline data to specifically target the gap between communities' existing protection practices and additional practices that they could take, the change generated from a heatwave project could be more clearly demonstrated in evidencing that a heatwave project has been able to fill that gap. The next slide is kind of carrying on a bit from that, which is really talking about while a CAP study can be really helpful to establish whether or not the community knows the different messages. Actually, it's very difficult for any of these to be attributed to the interventions implemented by START funding. In the HANS and START study in 2020, fewer than 10% of declared changes were taken for the first time after the project. For this reason, it's possible that repeated messaging campaigns in the same area or targeting the same population with communications every year might be redundant because that messaging might be retained, or it's possible as well that self-protection activities that communities take in the survey period cannot be attributed to the project. Various lessons have come up from these different projects, the CAP project, the CAP study in 2020 and also in 2021, which could be used for future project plans. One of the recommendations was that in-person awareness, which was deemed the most effective by ACF, should be evaluated for long-term retention. How long do people retain that message? And if there is a trigger maybe in 2022, are they able to target instead a different region because that population has retained that messaging from last year? As we can see here as well, two of the other lessons from the CAP study in 2020 was that translating knowledge into practice is a challenge. More work should be done to understand barriers to taking protective measures, which kind of links to my point in this slide before. And yeah, as I said, about face-to-face messaging and about exploring the efficacy and the long-term impact of that. The next slide is really an example of this, where we can see the really common practices that we might expect about avoiding physical work in the hot periods, not going outside between 11 and 3, and drinking water were already knowledge and practices that were taken by a large proportion of the population. Instead, we see actually that there were quite a few knowledge gaps and sort of quite limited acquired knowledge. So really, whenever we're looking at improving how we anticipate or how we have early action projects for heatwave in the future, it might be better to look at these red areas and the gaps to see how this can be better targeted. So the next slide just has a kind of summary of these 3 basic recommendations. Some of these are really specifically for the START fund, particularly that first point around targeting, because with the START fund niche, you obviously have to play that balance between impact versus kind of not being too big and being small to medium. So as I said, about communicating the target population clearly, raising the alert as soon as possible, especially where it's not reliant on a DRF trigger, but instead on members' interpretation of forecasts, and about looking perhaps at using historical data to recommend some different activities which might be more tailored or informed by a baseline to the population. If I have time, I was just going to quickly go through on the next slide some of the other alerts that have occurred as a result of high temperature or with high temperature as an aggravating factor. It's not just heat wave. We've also seen a number of wildfire alerts where extreme high temperature has been an aggravating factor. And also this has been in El Salvador, where there's 1 anticipatory alert underway, 2 in Bolivia, and then 1 in Pakistan. On the next slide, these heat-induced or heat-aggravated fire incidents are actually the minority when it comes to the fire alerts Start Fund generally responds to. It's actually much more common to have fire alerts that have happened due to usage of electric items in colder weather and in densely populated areas. So a couple of recent examples, Alert B038, 540 in DRC, and the MRF Alert 17. These kinds of fires, often in densely populated regions, can be mitigated by effective winterization in some areas, such as Alert 574, where cash was provided so that people could buy safe methods of fuel and heating up. As I said, there is an exception. So as one example, the alert in 2017 in Pakistan, where I'm just still in the previous slide, I'm so sorry, I'm just trying to, sorry, where hot winds in dry conditions led to not only high malnutrition levels, but also to aggravated man-made fires, leading to a destruction of houses due to the primary use of Chonra-style building. Ongoing resilience activities that were included were not only relevant to heatwave messaging about not going outside during the hottest period and drinking water, also about how to seek health intervention in case of a heatwave, and also longer term fire prevention, how to treat houses, providing window coverings and provision of fire extinguishers to the community. The ongoing example of the anticipation alert for heatwave, or for wildfires, apologies, is currently underway in El Salvador. This has been informed by more of a seasonal forecast, which was an annual recorded increase in wildfire numbers recorded by the National Firefighting Bureau in El Salvador, where wildfires had gone up 239% since the same period in 2021. There has been an extended and prolonged seasonal land drought in El Salvador and throughout the dry corridor, and ongoing and forecasted high temperatures. These are seasonal high temperatures and not a specific heat wave forecast, and hot winds. So by using these four indicators, El Salvador and the agencies there raised this alert for anticipation of wildfires, which, even though it is across a large area of El Salvador, so 40 of the 262 municipalities, they provided equipment kits to communities, local governments and municipalities, and first aid training and an awareness raising campaign. So again, these are not necessarily based on a specific short-term sort of DRF trigger or kind of forecast, but more using these kind of 4 different indicators combined to really anticipate this effectively. And here on the right, there's just a quick summary from the UNEP Rapid Response Assessment of climate change and the likelihood of increasing wildfires, which is an interesting report if people have time to read it. Yeah, and hopefully some of these recommendations and kind of using baseline and historical data can really help Start Fund members to increase and improve their heatwave projects moving forward. But that's everything for me. Hopefully I didn't take too much time, Milli.
No, you're great, Christine. Thank you so much for that. That's yeah, a really great overview of some of the work that's been going on through the Start Fund. And I've just added a slide in here as well. There is a heatwave pre-alert guidance note available. I will share these slides after the meeting. And yeah, that will be, that's linked there if anybody would like to access that. So our next speaker, moving swiftly on, is Jerome Faucet from the German Red Cross. Jerome is the head of the Vietnam Project Office, and since 2018, Jerome has been focusing on the impacts of heat waves on vulnerable groups living in urban contexts. And today we're going to hear about the Vietnam Red Cross Society's work on forecast-based financing for heat waves in Hanoi. Jerome, I believe you want to share your screen, so I'll just stop my share and hand over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And yes, please, I would like to share my screen. I think it's a little bit easier for me to go through it. Let me try if it's working. Could be. There we go. And now I should move to slide mode. Where is it? Yeah. Can you see my slide?
Yeah, you're good to go. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to present the Heatwave project in urban context in Vietnam using the forecast-based financing methodology. So the Vietnam Red Cross decided to work first in 3 cities, in Hanoi, Haiphong, and Da Nang, because in the last 40 years or so, we have seen the number of heatwave increasing there, and the number of deadly days per year range between 43 to 122 in Hanoi and Da Nang. So the project aimed to work with the street vendors and people making their living in the street, especially with focus on elderly people. And for selecting them, we have conducted a CAP survey where we found out that the outdoor workers are very exposed to heat risk, of course, because they are working very long hours. They don't have access to air conditioning during the day, but as well during the night. And we have seen that about 2/3 of them have between 4 to 7 symptoms of heat exhaustion during heat wave. And about 22% of them go to the doctor, and it costs them about 2 days of their daily income. So that was a rationale for working with them. We needed as well to find out where they are working and where they are living. So we developed impact forecast mapping methodology, where we use the data for 3 kinds of layers. The first layer is exposure. So the Vietnam Red Cross calculates the number of people living in slum, poor dormitory, because we know they don't have access to air conditioning. Then they took data for a second layer, which is vulnerability layer, the number of elderly people, people disabled, and children, because again, they are more exposed and they have more impact of it. And the third layer is a layer related to the hazard itself, the hotspot and high spot of high temperature in the cities. So by overlaying the 3 layers of information, the NRC has been able to select the 10% the most at-risk ward in each single city, which are basically the ward in dark red and the green border. So now looking at the specific layer of hazard, what we have done, we asked the Institute of Hydrology in Vietnam to compute data from Landsat 8 product, which is the map on the left side. And you can see some hotspots, the red light. And based on those map, we have developed our specific map, ranking each single ward and giving a specific rank to them according to the temperature, the surface temperature. So basically, by overlaying the 3 layers of information, vulnerability, exposure, and hotspot, we are able to know where we should be acting. So to know where to act and to who to work is good, but we as well need to know when. And it's where the Institute of Hydrology developed a trigger for us. So they developed a heat index forecast for 3 cities, actually for 10 now, 10 cities. And they can predict temperature, relative humidity, and they use some temperature and humidity to calculate the heat index, which is kind of giving an indication of the perceived temperature. So the Institute can forecast 6 days in advance an extreme heat. And for us, an extreme heat is when the heat index exceeds the orange line that you can see on the top. And the orange line is a 99 percentile for Da Nang, a 97 percentile for Hanoi and Haiphong. So we are looking at the very extreme heat wave for the forecast-based financing mechanism. So it's only a 1 in 5 years return period heat wave. Also, the VNRC aim to trigger for lower trigger in the future, but still we are looking at funding to do so. The 6-day lead time is a kind of readiness trigger, and when it's reached, basically the NRC will start preparing for early action. And it's only if the trigger is still reached at 3 days before the heat wave that the forecast-based financing protocol will be activated. So money will be sent from Geneva in Switzerland to Hanoi and then trickle down to the branches. And the anticipatory measure will be implemented before the heat wave. So as we know to who we want to work, street vendors, when to work and where to work, we apply a theory of change to basically better understand the problem and potentially finding solution. So the problem is really that the slum dweller and outdoor workers, they never have the chance to get relief from it during the day, but as well during the night, because basically due to their livelihood, they are exposed during the day, and during the night, they don't have any place to rest. So the aim of the early action is to reduce the occurrence of heat-related symptoms, and of course, to mitigate the impact of extreme heat and potentially to save lives. So based on the theory of change, we have worked on different solutions, and we have tested one which is working for us, which is opening cooling center. So basically, what is it about? The Vietnam Red Cross operate community cooling center, which is 30 center for Hanoi, as well as buses, 15 in Hanoi. And at the same time, they organize slum visit. So basically, the cooling centers, they are tent equipped with a cooling system, like air conditioning and so on. And they are managed by VNRC volunteers who can provide water, cold towel, but as well they provide an assessment, because what we want to know, it is the status, the health status of the beneficiary. And based on it, different actions are taken, and eventually they can provide first aid if needed. The cooling bus, they are going around the street in Hanoi, and they convey messages, awareness messages, and as well they kind of direct the beneficiary to the tent. So here you can see some picture of a test in 2019. You can see the beneficiaries. They are street vendors, builders. A lot of builders come to the centers. And not only the VNRC set up the tent, but of course they have as well developed a specific procedure, a standing operating procedure, and a care protocol for those cooling centers. So basically, the protocol aims to, of course, reduce the impact of heat wave, and is based on a series of procedures depending on the health status and health symptom of the visitor. And in the SOP, we describe the way to provide health monitoring by the volunteer. And depending on the assessment, different tasks will be performed. So the assessment takes place in step 4. Other steps include awareness building and as well, of course, providing water and so on to the beneficiary. I would like to mention that this SOP for Vietnam is going to be upgraded at international level with the support of the German Red Cross and IFRC. And in the coming months, we should share with our NGO a global guideline for managing cooling center based on the example of Vietnam. So I just will give you some example of how does it work. So once the assessment is done, for instance, if we see that the beneficiary have symptoms of heat exhaustion, they will be invited to lie down at least 20 minutes in the cooling center, and we will put some cold towel on their neck, head and armpit. And if after 20 minutes they still have symptoms, then we will call an emergency ambulance, because it's not normal to have more than 20 minutes symptom. And while we are waiting for the ambulance, we will perform a very aggressive way to cool down their temperature by basically putting cold towel in all their body and directing the air conditioning to them. If we see during the assessment that they have emergency sign, so we will not even wait, we will directly call the ambulance. And as well, the VNRC staff are trained eventually to perform CPR if ever the person stop breathing, and we need to perform cardiac CPR actually. I would like to mention that as part of the early action, the cost of going to the hospital as well as the cost of the care in the hospital are paid by the early action protocol. So basically, how does it work? So we have a first trigger, and the trigger will be reached by VNRC headquarters with branches, and as well through the Facebook campaign. Sorry. Then the VNRC will, the different branches will check with their volunteers if they are available, and a refresher training will take place very quickly. Then we will have a second trigger at day -3 before the heat wave. And after the second trigger, we'll have a very quick approval from the headquarters. Actually, it's automatically approved if the trigger is switched. And again, the stakeholder will be informed, and the different equipment will be dispatched, and the second Facebook campaign will start. Then 1 day before the heat wave actually occur, the extreme heat wave occur, the VNRC volunteer will start the slum visit as well as setting up the cooling center, and they will start welcoming the people. And then, of course, the early action will carry on during the heat wave. So when we did the test, we learned a lot, and we see that first it's possible. So during the specific lead time, 6 days and 3 days, we can implement the early action. We have enough time. It is relevant because 80% of the visitors are the people we wanted us to visit the tent. They are street vendors and they have symptoms. So we target the right person, and the right person are coming. And they come for the right purpose, which is to kind of rid off their symptom or to avoid symptom or to feel better when they have symptoms. So they're the right person and they come for the right purpose. It is efficient because the temperature in the tent is between 10 to 15 degrees below, below the external temperature. And 95% of the visitors, they feel they are better after the visit. The tent as well is a way to promote good behavior. And what we want is not that they come only once, but that they come back several times. So during the test, we have about 42% of beneficiaries who came back several times. And we aim to increase this percentage because we would like them to come regularly. It is socially acceptable. We have a lot of media coverage locally, but as well nationally, even internationally. And it is as well relatively cost efficient because the cost of running the tent with everything included is about 3,000 per tent, including everything, the campaign, the volunteers, the cost of the tent. And we aim for 500 visits minimum, but we did more. So if we have 500 visits for 3,000, it's €6 per visit. And it's only for people visiting the tent. It doesn't count for the beneficiary through the Facebook campaign. So actually, the cost is much lower than that. It is as well replicable and scalable, and the NRC aims to replicate that in 10 cities, and not only for the very extreme heat wave, as per FBF protocol, but for much lower trigger, like the annual trigger. But of course, for that, they need to find money. So it's a bit a problem because we do have money in the Red Cross system for very extreme events, but not for the annual one. And we are working on several options with private donors, as well as potentially we may have support from CARE International actually in Vietnam for an implementation in Ho Chi Minh City. Some other learning, it is very important to launch the early action at least one day before, because it's good for the beneficiary to see visually where the tents are, because they will come the day after. Very important to prepare MOU with local authority for really be sure the tents are placed in the right place, and for the authorization. To have a good networking with hospital and healthcare, because at the end, if everything goes wrong, we still send them to the hospital. The launching of the Facebook campaign at day 6 and day 3 is as well very important to attract more people. And I think one of the success is because we have very localized trigger. For each single city, we have a specific trigger. We have clear guideline and a clear SOP. So because of that, we really believe it's scalable. And actually, we are developing a proposal with Oxford University, not only to replicate, but as well to evaluate at population level the impact of the early action. Because so far, we can see a perceived impact. We can measure the visit, but we don't have an impact at population level. So with Oxford University, a research institute, we are looking at how can we prove eventually the impact at population level. Anyway, if you want to have more learning, I will share the presentation. You can click on the link. There are several case studies there, some movies, and please help yourself and go visiting the website. I would like to mention that the project of the NRC is within the global framework of IFRC priority on heatwave. The Red Cross movement aims at better protecting from heatwave 250 million people around the world in 150 cities and towns by 2025. So it's really becoming a priority for the Red Cross movement with a strategic paper. And as well, in order to support this priority, we have a lot of materials to share. Again, you can click on the link here, Prepare Center. You can see some posters in different languages, mainly for Pacific, Asia Pacific, but as well, I think, in French. And we have a guideline for cities, which is aiming at government professional who would like to better prepare their cities. And we have as well another one, which is more for Red Cross branches, helping them looking at better understanding heatwave, what to do during, how to learn from it, and how to prepare for future heatwave. And the last document on the right one is first Asia Pacific Regional Heatwave Meeting, which took place last year. Please do visit as well this webpage, because there is a lot of link with different people working on heatwave globally, but of course more focus on Asia Pacific, not only from the Red Cross movement, but for research, Science Research Institute and INGO. And I would like to close my presentation by inviting you or your national society to eventually register to the Heat Action Days, which is taking place on the 14th of June in many, many countries. Some flash mob will be organized in public spaces for basically raising awareness on heat risk. And please do so, link if you want to join, and you are welcome. So I think I will stop for me. I hope I was not too quick for our friend who are doing the translation, but please ask me questions if you do have some. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jerome. That was perfect timing. Thank you. And thank you also for that insight into the work of the Red Cross on heat waves in urban environments. We do have 5 minutes for questions. I believe you have to drop off the call after that. But if anybody does have any questions, please do feel free to raise your hand, to post them into the chat now. And yeah, as I say, Jerome will be stepping off the call, so please do ask those now. Are there any questions or comments for, yeah, Ashraf, please go ahead. Thanks.
Hi, Jerome. That was great to hear from you. Could you just tell us what are the forecasting that you've been using for deciding on the triggers?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And how about the accuracy?
So basically, the Institute for Hydrology, they are using their own forecast from Vietnam, and they can forecast temperature and humidity. So what they have done new for us is basically to use temperature and humidity to calculate heat index. We are not used to do heat index forecasting before. They do it for us through modeling. And they can forecast 6 days in advance with a 3 days lapse. So each single 3 days, we have a new forecast. So basically, we have an internal web page that we can consult from the 15th of April up to the 15th of October. It's automatically set up by IMEN, the Institute of Hydrology. And the accuracy, okay, I don't have it in mind right now, but basically we need to go to a process of approval by the FBF committee in Geneva, and he has been approved as being accurate enough for the forecast. We have to understand that it's only for extreme heat. We are aiming for the 5 years return period. And it's why the percentile is 97 and 98, no, 97 and 99, which is very high. And they are not as such based on impact, because it's very difficult to link an impact with the temperature and humidity. But if you look at the literature, humidity index are considered as capturing somehow the impact, because they are looking as well as the impact on health in a general way. So the way to go around this issue of forecasting impact, because we cannot, is to use heat index. It's the best proxy you can have so far to evaluate what could be the impact on population. There are quite a lot of publication on that. So I can give you the link if you want. So
thank you.
Yeah,
thanks. So look forward for the link. And just the last question regarding the impact, that what we did with the cold wave, we are looking for the hospital data, like, you know,
yeah,
in the different hospitals, they have the year-round data. And if we could look at the year-round data, and then the spike during the heat time period, that could give us some sort of impact kind of idea, isn't it?
You are totally right, and it's why we are very happy to start developing a concept note with Oxford University based. They have a sub research center in Hanoi, because the aim is exactly that: is to have a better link with hospital and to see population impact. What we cannot do us as an NGO level, because it's very difficult to get access to data from hospital and to see the added mortality or morbidity. We cannot see that in many countries. We know there's a drawback for heat wave impact, and to make the case basically. So we do hope that this concept now will go through, because well, we are not fully sure our project has an impact at population level. We feel like, but you know, the only way is to really work with hospital and to look at it in this way. And So the concept note is not going to be only with the hospital, but we will have as well a practitioner potentially putting devices on beneficiary to monitor their health status. It's a nice project. I cannot speak more about it because it's just a concept, but we do hope to get some money for that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Jerome. I don't think there are any other questions. I will share those slides, as I mentioned, with the links there. And yeah, we will hear a little bit more in just a moment about the different proxies and ways of measuring impact. So now I'm going to hand over to Ross Maidment, who is an Earth observation core scientist at the University of Reading, and who's been working recently with START Network on the heatwave model in Pakistan. Ross, I believe you'd also like to share your screen. Just a reminder, just for the interpreters, that if you could go a little bit slower than you usually would, that would be great. Over to you, thanks.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you. All right, I'll just try and share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen.
Not yet.
Okay, it says it's sharing on my end, but okay, let me just try this again. Okay,
yeah,
hopefully you can see that now. Okay, great, good. So hello everyone. I'm, as Milli said, I'm Ross Maidment from the University of Reading, Earth observation scientist and also a meteorologist. And I've been working with START now for a few years on the Pakistan heatwave DRF model. So I just wanted to share some of the kind of the experiences that we've had in terms of developing the model validation, and also how we have selected the appropriate thresholds for the different cities across Pakistan. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of just have this introductory slide. I think it's quite obvious why we need to monitor heat waves. I think that's been made very clear in the presentations that we've had so far. But I think for Pakistan, I just wanted to kind of show you this figure here. So this is a figure showing the Pakistan temperature anomalies since the start of the 20th century. And you can clearly see, as we know, with global warming, that temperatures have been increasing. But we can clearly see how in the last 2 decades, how warm Pakistan has been. And if you were to produce these sorts of plots for other countries, you'll see something very similar. You may have seen these plots. So these are from the Show Your Stripes website, developed by Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading. And at the top right here is the climate stripes, which I'm sure many of you have seen before. So I thought this is just a kind of nice way just to kind of illustrate kind of why monitoring heat waves is important, and how monitoring heat waves as we move into the future, it will become even more important as the frequency and intensity of heat waves becomes greater. I've just put on the bottom here about the fact that when we monitor heat waves, we need reliable and timely information. So the previous presenter was talking about the forecast and the data used for assessing and tracking heat waves. And in order to do this properly, we need to have confidence in the data that's being used. In terms of the different methods and different models that we can use, there's various different metrics that are available to assess heat waves. Jerome from the previous talk mentioned that over Vietnam heat index is used, and that's also what is used over Pakistan. But there are many, many other different metrics which are used, and I've mentioned a few of them here. So, for example, the Universal Thermal Climate Index, the Thermal Humidity Index, and so on. And each of these, they ingest different driving data, so different meteorological variables, and also have different models. But for the rest of this talk, I'll be focusing on heat index. So within the Pakistan heatwave DRF, what we've achieved is an operational heatwave model that triggers in the event of adverse heatwave conditions for multiple cities across Pakistan. As I've said, this is based upon the heat index, and this is based upon forecasts of both temperature and relative humidity. And these are taken from the global forecast system model. And the reason for doing this is because these are the forecasts which are also used by the Pakistan Meteorological Department. So the information that's being used in this model is consistent with the information which is being provided by PMD. We've made sure that the heatwave model has been carefully calibrated using historical observations for each city to ensure that the appropriate thresholds are used for different cities. And I believe Jerome mentioned the same thing for Vietnam, that it's kind of a locally calibrated approach which has been used. Lastly, in terms of the outputs, these are all available on a dashboard, which is available from this link here. And at the end of my talk, I've got a few slides with some more information on this. Just a bit more about the actual the heat index. So the heat index equation is used by NOAA, and here is the formula here. I won't say much more about it, apart from that it's an empirical model, so it's derived from experimental data, and as you can see, it's a function of both temperature and relative humidity. For the model itself, the heat index must exceed a given threshold for 2 consecutive days in order to trigger. But we also have an additional trigger for the city of Karachi, and that is given here. So the minimum temperature during the day must be above or greater than 30 degrees Celsius, and the maximum temperature must be equal or above 42 degrees Celsius for 2 consecutive days. So the heat index is used for every city, but we also have this additional check for Karachi based upon the temperature. In terms of where the model has been implemented so far, it's been implemented in these cities here, which I've indicated on the map here. And for the model validation itself, we have used ground-based observations of temperature and relative humidity from each of these cities and compared that against the GFS forecasts. This comparison not only allows us to assess the skill of the forecast, but also allows us to determine the appropriate trigger thresholds for each of these cities. In terms of the data that's being used, we've used the daily observations of temperature and relative humidity, as I've just said. These are from GSOD, also known as the Global Summary of the Day. So this is just an archive of the meteorological variables which are shared publicly, and this is updated every day, and there are long-term records from GSOD. For the GFS forecast, we are using the 3 hourly forecasts at a 1 degree resolution, and the period of study that we've looked at is 17 years from 2004 to 2020. The reason why we can only go back to 2004 is that this is the period in which the GFS forecasts have been archived. There is no records going further back than that. But still, 17 years is a good enough period for us to work with. So just to give some sort of qualitative results. So here we have maps of the forecast temperatures that's given by the grid, and the circles, the dots, I just try to change my cursor so you can actually see hopefully you can see a laser now. So the circles are actually the observed values. So here we have the mean daily temperatures which are being shown, and on the top here we have 2 given days during the winter months. So we have the 28th of February 2012 on the top left here, and the 15th of January 2012 on the top right here. And on the bottom, we have a day in May and a day in June. So we're basically just sampling some of the cold months and some of the warmer summer months. And we can see that generally there is good agreement between the observations and what the model is saying. So we can capture the kind of cooler northern parts of the country, and also the kind of the warmer southern parts of the country. So this is just a kind of a qualitative way just to kind of check if the forecast information coming from the GFS is broadly consistent with the observations. Okay, so following on from the qualitative comparison that we just had, here we have a time series for one given year, and this is for Karachi Airport for the year 2020. On the left-hand side here is the time series for temperature on the top here, relative humidity for the middle panel, and at the bottom we have the corresponding heat index. The grey line is the GSOD, so these are the observations, and the blue line is the model, is the GFS model. The fainter lines that you might be able to see, they are just the climatology, just for reference. And on the right-hand side here, we have the corresponding plots, but showing the anomaly. So it's the difference between the observations, or sorry, the day-to-day values and the climatology. So again, these plots are just very useful just to kind of ascertain if the day-to-day variability that we see in observations, whether or not that is captured by the model. And we can see that actually the model does a very good job in picking up the day-to-day changes in temperature and relative humidity. So you can see, for example, that often when we get kind of a increase in temperature, that's often picked up by the forecast. So this gives us confidence that the model has some resemblance to what is actually happening. Okay, so these are just kind of some summary plots looking at 3 measures of skill. So on the left here we have the R squared. So this is basically a measure of agreement. On the middle here we have bias, which is a measure of under or over estimation. And on the left here we have the root mean square error, which is a measure of the size of the average error. So on the left here, going back to the R squared value, what we can see, sorry, I should also say that each of these colors correspond to each city given by the legend here. Okay, so what we can see is that for most of the cities, about 70% of the day-to-day variability is captured by the GFS model, which is very good. So this indicates that the model generally does a very good job at detecting short-term changes in temperature. I should also say that these plots are just for temperature. The kind of only outlier is for Nawabshah, where during the summer months the scale becomes lower. In terms of bias, what we find is that Karachi, out of all the cities that we've looked at, has the smallest bias, typically lower than 1 degree Celsius, while Sibi has a kind of a very large consistent bias of around -5 degrees C, whereas the other the other cities, they tend to have a kind of a small warm bias in the order of 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. In terms of the error, what we find is that Karachi and Nawabshah tend to have the smallest errors, whilst Sibi has the greatest errors. So we can kind of see some patterns here that generally most of the cities are doing a very good job, but Sibi kind of seems to be kind of a standout city where the skill of the forecasts isn't as good as in other places. I'll skip that slide because I think that shows kind of similar information. So just kind of a bit more about Sibi. So we looked into this. Obviously, we had quite limited information to kind of really do an in-depth study as to why Sibi is performing badly, but if we just have a look at a map to see where Sibi is, so you can see there's the red arrow pointing to Sibi here, we can see it's surrounded by mountains. And we know that the resolution of the data that we're looking at, which is 1 degrees, is quite coarse. So there's a very good, so the most likely explanation is that the model is picking up some of the higher kind of mountain areas as well. So obviously that land will be colder. So it's likely that the mountainous areas nearby is biasing the grid square box that we are using for Sibi. It might also be that the model could have some issues due to the complex topography around Sibi. So it is likely that the proximity of Sibi to the mountains is this reason for the poor skill over Sibi. So that's just some slides just on the skill of the model. When we come to move on, kind of looking at the different thresholds and what thresholds we should be choosing, here's just a quick look at Jacobabad and just having a look how heat index triggers can vary as a function of threshold. So here we have 5 different thresholds. So you can see here the threshold value. So at the bottom here we have 61 degrees Celsius for the heat index, 56, 51, 41, and so on. So as we go down the screen, the thresholds get warmer. And what is shown are the number of triggers per a year over the 17 years that we've looked at. So what we can see is that for this given example, if we kind of select the 51 degrees Celsius threshold, we can see that only the blue bars, which are the observations, are triggering, but there's no triggers coming from the model data. If you go to a warmer threshold, we can see that actually both the GFS and the observations are triggering. Some years there is good agreement, some years there's not so good agreement, but then as we kind of go to warmer thresholds, we're getting more and more triggers, which is what we would expect. So that's just a kind of a good way just to kind of start to get a feel for which sort of heat index thresholds we should be using. And then kind of this slide here summarizes kind of the choices that we made. So by looking at the mean trigger rate per year, based upon all the 17 years of the data that we've looked at, we can derive different trigger threshold rates, and then using that, define return periods. So here is a table of the thresholds which we've actually have chosen for the model, and as I've said in the title of the table here, these are based upon 1 in 3 year return periods. And this has been done for every city, and you can see here the model threshold. So this is what's implemented operationally, and this is what the corresponding threshold is based upon the observations. So you can see there is kind of a difference between the GFS and the GSOD values, but this is just a way to kind of see how the model does have biases. But if we look at the historical data, we can carefully calibrate the trigger threshold so we get the correct expected return. You can also see at the bottom here, Sibi has a much warmer threshold, but we know that's wrong. So in practice, Sibi is not, any triggers for Sibi are not based on the GFS model, but are done retrospectively using observations. And so this comes on to my last few slides, which is the dashboard that I mentioned. So this can be accessed from this URL here. And this dashboard, it's basically a summary dashboard which indicates if and when a certain city is being triggered, and if it is triggered, it will display information about why it's being triggered. At the moment, no triggers are happening, so there's nothing there. I cannot show you an actual trigger event, but in the event that something is being triggered, then this table will start to be populated. From this table, there are also links to other plots. I one thing I should also mention before I show you some of these plots is that obviously with forecasts, the forecasts that we are using from GFS, we are accessing we're accessing forecasts up to a lead time of 10 days. But we know that as you increase the lead time, the errors or the uncertainty in the forecast become greater. So the triggers will only happen up to, or will only be based upon data with lead times of up to 7 days. So if we do see a trigger that's say in day 8 or day 9, for example, it will show up, but nothing will be triggered because we believe that the uncertainty in the forecast is too great. Once we get to day 7 or less, the uncertainty decreases, so our confidence in the forecast becomes better. And then so if anything triggers within 7 days or less, then action is taken. So just to show you some of the other plots which can be accessed from this dashboard. So when you go to this dashboard, you can click on each of these cities, and this will display the time series of the forecast lead times up to 10 days. It will do that for heat index, which is what's being used as the trigger, as well as the temperature and the relative humidity. I also mentioned that for Sibi, because of the poor skill in the GFS model, any triggers are done retrospectively using observations. So we also access the GSOD observations on an operational basis, and this is what's shown here. So these are updated every day using the latest information. And we also have these observation plots for each of the other cities as well. So just to summarize, so we have operationalized and developed a heatwave model, which is based upon the GFS forecast that triggers in the event of adverse heatwave conditions for multiple cities across Pakistan. The model itself is based upon the heat index, which is based upon forecasts of temperature and relative humidity. Through our validation, we can see that the GFS model demonstrates good skill in reproducing the observed variability in heat index, but there are certain regions where the model does portray or exhibit poor skill, such as around Sibi. When it comes to the forecasts lead time, the model will trigger with a maximum lead time of up to 7 days. And lastly, the model outputs are accessible through the online dashboard, which I've just shown. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. That was really fantastic. If it's okay with you, we have 2 more presentations focused on Pakistan, so we might move straight to those and then hopefully open for questions at the end. But if anybody would like to ask any questions right away, please feel free to pop those into the chat box, and hopefully Ross, you'll be okay to respond to those.
Sure, that's fine.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen again. And our next speaker is Lizzy Rees from the START network. Is that the right screen? I don't think so. 1 second. Hang on a moment. There we go. I think can you see the right screen there?
Yeah.
Lovely, great. All right, so Lizzy, over to you, please. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Milli. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm going to continue talking about heat waves in the context of Pakistan, and it's kind of a lead on from Ross's presentation, and it's about improving our DRF system in place by attempting to quantify the impact of heat waves. So that missing component that we kind of have in our current DRF system in Pakistan. So I'm going to run you through some recent work carried out as a first step to try and narrow this gap, and importantly, how the output has been used in the Start Ready program, and how it can be used or is going to be used going forward in Pakistan with the members, and possibly in other countries in a wider context. So if we just go to the next slide. Okay, so you've just seen this from Rosa's presentation. It's just a recap of the current system in place. And this is the dashboard of the Heatwave DRF system. As you can see, it pulls out the heat index, which is the metric that we're using to set the thresholds, and then some other key metrics. And we're using GFS forecast, as it's the same outlook as the PMD, and it's freely accessible. So you can see here in the box at the top, these are the cities that are currently being monitored in the DRF system, and then it's a forecast-based trigger. So based on those heat index 1 and 3 return periods that you can see, and all of them are independent for each city. And as Ross touched on, we have a 7-day lead time. So again, it's that trade-off between certainty and lead time. We actually this weekend had an alert on lead time day 8, but because the system is set at 7 days lead time, and it had already the forecast threshold had actually gone under by day 7. So that's kind of, we've just had a recent example of how crucial maybe that lead time is and the uncertainty around that. And then another thing that pops up is the observational data, which as well said, you can link to at the bottom. And that just enables us a quick triangulation comparison with the forecast data, and it can be used to manage live basis risk events. And it's also, by having it accessible on this dashboard, it reduces the time for us to try and dig around with the observational data and calculate that heat index. And so it reduces any resource requirements on our side. And the technical working group can use this to dynamically manage the basis risk during the monitoring period. Okay, if we just go quickly to the next slide. So this is just to show how it's communicated if a threshold has been reached. And I think Brightstar will talk about this after this presentation. But as you can see, it's just if a threshold has exceeded those heat index values, it will be automated on the dashboard, and it will be communicated to the NSC and the relevant stakeholders, and then financing will be triggered. Okay, next slide. So trigger payouts are based on the forecast, which is the severity and frequency of the hazard. So how do we calculate the associated impact? And we want to factor this in, so the exposure and vulnerabilities into this equation alongside the hazard. So hazard plus vulnerability equals risk, as you all are aware. So we want to, ideally in a DRF system, we want to know how many people are likely to be affected, so we can tailor our anticipatory actions and decision-making if or when triggered. We also, wanting to know the impact, the likely impact on number of people affected, as it's going to give us confidence in the design thresholds, which trigger our early action. So how do we do this? Okay, so we need to compare heat wave impacts of past heat wave events with back calculated historical trigger performance. So in other words, how did people endure the effects of extreme heat, and to what severity? So linking that up with our thresholds that we already have in place. This has also been recommended by the Karachi Heatwave Management Plan, so of validating thresholds against human health records to ensure that robust relationship between the criteria and the threshold set and the heat stress that it has on people. Okay, so if we just go to the next slide. So as Jerome has already mentioned, what are the impacts of heat waves? What data might we need? So it can lead, extreme heat can lead to dangerous, deadly health consequences, including heat stress and heat stroke. And obviously, as Ross mentioned, and climate change only drives this temperature higher, whereas increasing that frequency and severity of heat waves. And the full impact can occur a few hours or up to a few days from the actual event, and therefore it's difficult to make that link. And we're likely underestimating any reported values or people affected. And that is the huge difficulty in retaining these stats, as it's been mentioned in this presentation with health, with hospital records, etc. We just go to the next slide. So it's also important to look at the secondary impacts in considering the estimated total loss of these events. And I've just listed some here: stress and mortality with animals, damage to crop and vegetation, reduced economic activity. And if we just click again, now we see some situations, some factors that might amplify the situation. So we might want to include this in a system to get closer to understanding, that feel-like condition. So we've got high nighttime temperatures, and that's factored into the Karachi Commissioner Office heatwave threshold and emergency planning. And we've seen it become quite evident from our analysis and from this year that it's a factor that is likely to be considered into our DRF system. But we've also got to bear in mind the complexities of a system that we're building here. And then high humidity, we've involved that in the heat index calculation, and also low wind speed. Ross did some analysis a couple of years ago to try and find the correlation between wind speeds, but it was limiting in these studies. So we haven't been able to factor that in. And then you've got low soil moisture, and then also you've got the urban heat island effect, which was significant in explaining the number of deaths during the Karachi event in 2015. So these are some factors that could be incorporated or considered in a heatwave DRF system. So if we just go to the next slide. Okay, so if we just go back to the system and how we might improve the impact component. Given that our system, the Pakistan system, does not tell us how many people are going to be affected in each location. So the problem is the lack of data on past impacts. And this is an issue that needs to be addressed or improved. So we can assess the trigger suitability, and we can also minimize the chances of basis risk events. So the research undertaken starts to investigate and pull together and quantify historical impact data. So the aim was to create a standard record of heat wave impacts in Pakistan, and then we try and tie in the meteorological data sets, and then we have to try and link and see the relationships between them. So this database can be used by the technical working group in assessing where impacts may have warranted early action, so that's suitability. And also it's been implemented into our Start Ready program, which I'll come to on my last slide. Okay, if we just go to, yeah, thank you. Okay, so the method of how this database was constructed. So you looked at 8 sources, that was international sources, national sources, meteorological data sets, humanitarian agencies, and then even catastrophe insurance sources when available, and also news and media outlets. And the data was extracted that linked to any heat wave in any location in Pakistan. So the basis of the database stems from MDAT, and that's widely regarded as a comprehensive database covering all sets of perils. And it has an advantage of undergoing a validation process and is recommended by a number of sources and research papers. So MDAT dataset quantify a heat wave event if there is 10 or more deaths, if 100 or more people have been affected, or if an emergency declaration or an appeal for international assistance has been raised. Some limitations of MDAT is that sometimes it lacks granularity and resolution. So you can see here pre-2007, some of the heat wave events are just province assigned. And so some work has been done to try and associate where exactly that heat wave event has been declared. So for that reason, for some of this MDAT database, then it was other databases were fed into it for different events that weren't included into it. So if we just look at this table here, and also population data set has been adjusted over the course of the historical catalogue. And they were, so the census data was used, or city population data sets were used. So the database, as you can see, contains a total of 11 events, which occur since the start of 2000. So the latest one being 2018. And if we assume if we have that 20-year history, then it indicates an AAL, so an average frequency of one event approximately every 1.8 years. And it shows, the table also shows the effective locations and the estimated number of deaths and people affected. So 140 people have died on average each year, but the majority of that has, under half, was taken from that 2015 Karachi heatwave event. And over 70% of events occurred during the May and June, and all but one event occurred in April, July. So that supports our the current monitoring system that the Pakistan DRF holds, which has a monitoring period of April to July. And then impacts likely like those experienced in 2015 has not otherwise been observed in records. So we might expect at least 20 years return period for that one big event there. And then if we just click again, then an example of that graph in Karachi, and you can see it kind of mimics that pattern, historical pattern of number of people impacted, and then the heat index percentiles. So kind of that's giving an indication that we're kind of on the right lines with some of our threshold settings. Okay, some of the, also what we've assumed here is that event frequency assumes that the database is complete, and with impacts during a single event range from tens of people injured to well over 1,000 deaths. So if we just, we'll just go on the next slide. Okay, so extracting the meteorological, and while sources such as MDAT and other ones looked at report the heatwave impacts often included, there's generally a lack of definition or clarity around its origin, and occasionally even when it pertains to a forecast or observation. So that's why we kind of went with extracting the meteorological data from the observational data. So that's known as the GSOD data. And we calculated the percentiles, so the heat wave and the maximum heat waves against all April and July days. So you can see here that the historical events impact a mixture of locations. So some of them we've got 3 locations or 2 locations there. And the results feel kind of a level of correlation between the rank of heat index and the impact ranking. And then, as I said before, for some older events, we only know the impact provinces. So if we just go on to the next slide here. Okay, so now we've got the meteorological data set, we've got the impact data, and now we need to try and tie in our thresholds that we've already set that Pakistan have in their DRF system. So there's a wide range of heat index and temperature values in impacted location. So that supports the notion that we have, each city has their own dependent thresholds because it depends on the climatology of that region. As we know, Pakistan has a huge range of climatology impacts. And then the correlation between impact ranking and rank of heat in index percentiles. So the top 5 occur in the 92 percentile and 3 above the 98. And then also we see a high temperature, minimum temperature percentile. So that supports what's already been noted in the literature as quite an important metric to maybe include in some systems, and gives us support for maybe an evidence for maybe including that in the future, if that's what the technical working group and members deem is necessary. Now, we also looked at if past heat waves impacts would have exceeded the thresholds. And this, remember, is only for the observational data, not forecast data, which is what we trigger on. And as you can see in the black box on the left, none of these events would have triggered their 1 in 3 return period, which was equivalent to around 97 percentile or higher. But that's for 2 consecutive days. And we've also got to factor in the difference between and the limitations and the bias between the observational data and the GFS and data. So what's important to consider here is doing the same analysis, but for the GFS data, the forecast data, and check if the thresholds were exceeded. So if we just go to the next slide. Okay, so in summary, we've got 11 impacted heat wave events between 2000 and 2020, and on average that was 140 fatalities. And then the impacts like 2015 has not otherwise been observed in recent history in the observational data, but we have seen it in other forecast data, but not the GFS one yet. And then comfortingly, we see a positive correlation between, heat index and number of people impacted. And also we need to consider maybe minimum temperature is a factor that we need to consider going forward. And then there's some additional key takeaways at the bottom there. Now, lastly, I just wanted to show you the slide which shows how we have used this database in our Start Ready system. And in Start Ready, we need to model the underlying risks. So we need to have an exceedance probability curve, which is the frequency and severity of a risk for each country in the Start Ready system. And EPs, the exceedance probability, are defined in units of number of people. So it's the return period, the probability of this frequent severity event happening in any given year. So what we did here is now we've got the 11 events that we've got from the database. So we've got an historical record, we've got the return period, so the probability of that event may possibly occurring in any given year, and the likely number of people affected. So then we can calculate the full EP curve, which is on the right side, and that was computed statistically using a Pareto equation from the last 20 years of history of the data provided. And the Pareto, the EP curve, we use so we can estimate the larger, higher severity return periods. And so overall, this is our best estimate of risk based on the current information we have. We need an EP curve, as I said, to calculate that underlying risk. So it goes directly into the capital model, and we can calculate, or we can send it off to reinsurance to be purchased. And also the members can design suitable coverages for their needs, and to have the severity and frequency and the return period of those larger events. So there, of course, there's some limitations to all of these workings out, and they are explained in the document, which is, there's a link in one of these slides to the full report on this research analysis. And hopefully throughout this year and next year, we'll be improving this curve so it links a better estimate of number of people affected. So thank you for listening. I just want to say thanks to Alex, who did a lot of the data crunching, who sits in the CARF team at Start Network, and for the DRF team in Pakistan. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Lizzy. That was really great. I think we are a little bit tight for time. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I wonder whether you and Ross might be able to respond to those in the chat for now. And then hopefully if we have some time at the end, we can come back and open a bit of discussion. I'm just keen to make sure that everybody has the chance to present. So I'll just move on to the next presentation now. So next up, we have Juma joining us, who will talk through Bright Star Development Society Balochistan, their response to the heatwave in Sibi in 2021. Juma, are you on the line and ready to present?
Thank you, Milli.
Lovely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Will you please share this screen share?
Would you prefer to share your screen, or are you okay to talk to these slides?
I will go with this.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone. As you can see that Bright Star Development Society Balochistan is also a member of START network. This is a short and quick overview of our organization. Balochistan, with BSDSP are working in Balochistan, especially for sometimes we mostly have hello. Hello.
Hi, yeah, we can hear
Can
you.
you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yes. We are working from since 25 years in Balochistan, and we have also worked in different provinces. Especially our focus is Balochistan. We are working in different sectors, just like social mobilization, advocacy, civic education, emergency response preparedness, DRR and CBDRM, food security. Especially, we have responded to many disasters, and we have our volunteers available at most areas where we have worked. Please. As I said, that BSDSB has vast experience to responding emergencies, and we have responded complex emergency, and we have responded floods, so many floods over there at our region, Nasirabad, and also we have responded earthquakes as well. And from during COVID, we have responded 3 to 4 projects. Overall, we have in 3 to 5 years, we have responded 25 projects of different humanitarian response. I think we should go. Here I want to discuss some thing about heatwave response, which we have did in previous years. Heatwave project, DRF Pakistan heatwave project. This project was with the support of CARE International under the funding of START network, 8 districts, Sibi surrounding districts. This project was started from monitoring heatwave model monitoring was started from April 1st, 2021 through PMD, Pakistan Meteorological Department, and our PDM and Provincial Disaster Management Authority, and our district-led district disaster management authorities, and our volunteers were also working in the field and were sharing daily basis weather updates with us and also with the team of WHH. For this, we have, with the close coordination of PDMA, DDMA, and Pakistan Meteorological Department and other related stakeholders of the district. Onset of crisis 28 was started from 28 April 2021. The model was triggered on 9 June 2021. The project was implemented from June to next, please. During this project, we have few activities which are listed below. Like we have established cooling facilities at 3 different spots where so many crowd was available all the time, because the Sibi is main junction, and coming from different districts which are linked from Sibi, like Nasirabad district, Jafarabad district, and surrounding is one of the district is district Kachi. We have also distributed 250 heat wave kits among daily laborers, and looking over the activities of awareness, we have also aware the communities about the prevention protection on heat wave through different sort of activities. Disseminated heat wave preventive measures through social media and news channels. We have also engaged different social media tools. We have used Facebook, we have used different WhatsApp groups, and also we have used different channels to aware the community through social media and other tools. Next, please. This project was also, we were also evaluated, and we were also discussed about the activities, what activities we have did, and what was the gray areas of our findings. These findings were coming out from GLOW teams, and we are going here to share with you. Heatwave is a major problem in Sibi, as they are getting worse each year and impact negatively on people's health and livelihoods. People were using the cooling facilities and benefiting from the terms of their health and well-being. Before the start of this project, we have also observed that government has also initiated some cooling facilities which was not that much equipped, and they are not that much facilitating the communities. The cooling facilities represented something new for the community, a local-led public services. These cooling facilities were also acknowledged by the district government and district authorities and different other community groups as well. The cooling facilities represented something new for the community and local-led public services and acted as an example others could follow. 100% of those interviewed who had used the cooling facilities felt the environment was safe and comfortable. People felt the Bright Star close consultation with the local administration, understanding the community's need were critical in establishing the culturally appropriate services. Next, please. People were able to benefit from the behavioral messages. Some messages were new and helped dispel myths and pass the messages on others. We were using auto rickshaws, which usually called in locally the Chingchi rickshaw. The both sides banners was available, was displayed, and they were trained about what are written on these banners. They were also awareing the communities on their own. People were participating positively behavior more after the message where they could not to become livelihoods. People suggested improving access to messaging through, for example, using loudspeakers to cater to those who could not read. People suggested access to cooling facilities could be improved for girls and women by creating female-friendly spaces. As I said earlier, that during planning of previous months' activities, in the end of project, we were came to know that there is a much needed friendly space for females as well. And we were also lacking about the communities who are not that much aware, who are not literate. They must to know about, to aware through loudspeakers in Urdu or other local languages used. A key founding of particular relevance for other behavioral messages campaigns were marked gender differences in access, knowledge, and behavior related to the messaging. Next, please. Now for our heatwave response 2022, we have also planned some activities through those findings, and we were also looking over those findings and working on that. The modern heat wave started from April 2021. Here I just want to share with you people that the heat wave has, the hot weather has been started from March, month of March. As I experienced, I have also visited 2 or 3 visits at district Sibi, and for looking over the sensitivity or risk of heat stroke, the schools of districts are closed before 20 days, as these were closed in May 5 or May 10. June 5 or June 10. Monitoring of heat wave through START network, DRF model, PMD, local, provincial, national, PDMA, local volunteers, establishing of 5 cooling facilities. We had experience in last response with 3 cooling facilities. District administration was also asking for to include 2 to 3 other places where are with much more needed. Establish 5 cooling facilities and spare separate cooling friendly spaces for women and girls. With the new innovation, we have also in the recommendation of district administration, we are going to establish 5 temporary shelters for local police and levies forces, which are also at risk during heat wave. During our overall project, will also 60 days and cooling places will be established for 1 month in peak days heat waves. As per district administration, they were asking that you have to increase the days of cooling facilities as much as you can. Here are some, next please. Some snaps of our 2021 activities. Next. Milli, please, next. Next. You can see that auto rickshaws, banners are available in the hospital. Outside the hospital, we have displayed IC material and banners, and next please. Next. These are the IC material which we have developed and used during our activities. Next. Next, please.
Juma, I think maybe your
IC
connection
material
is
available in rickshaws with glow team. Next, please. Sorry, Milli, I was disconnected.
Yeah, that's okay. I've come to the end of the slides. Is that where you wanted to be? Can you hear me, Juma?
You hear me? Hello?
Yeah. Have you come to the end of your presentation?
Yes, I have done.
Lovely. All right. Thank you very much for that. That was really great. We are just about at the end of time. So if there are any questions, please do pop those into the chat for now. And I think just there was a question as well, Ross and Lizzy, on the relationship between the heatwave model and possible how that could be used for early warnings for food security. I don't know if either of you want to try to respond to that. But just for now, I'm going to move on to the next session, just because I know that Lydia has joined us from the Anticipation Hub to give a quick update from there. So Lydia, are you ready to go?
Hello, hi, I'm Milli.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Just double check if you can hear me okay.
Yeah, you're great.
Yeah, okay, cool, great. Yeah, hi everybody, not to take much time from you at all, but just to let you know that the Anticipation Hub will be actively engaging in the global platform on disaster risk reduction next week. So if you are there, please do connect with us. We will have a booth which will be running, so please do come and see us there. We'll also be actively involved in the Multi-Hazard Early Warning Conference and are running a couple of different sessions on early action and impact-based forecasting, and we will have a learning lab on the Friday morning, and we'll have a side event on the Friday afternoon. We will also have an anticipatory action dance at the Ignite stage. So yeah, please do connect with us there, and looking forward to meeting lots of our different partners and Start as well. And Start will be speaking on that panel on the Friday, which I will send a direct link for as well. And yeah, I won't take any more time, but please do get in touch if you have any questions. My email is also in the link.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Lydia. We have come to the end of the time for today, but if you do have any further questions, please feel free to email the FOREWARN email address with your questions, and we can make sure we get those answered for you. And I'll also be sharing the slides and the meeting recording within the week. So hopefully you'll be able to listen back if you missed anything, and we can respond to any of your questions after the fact. But for now, thank you so much to all of our speakers for joining us and for giving such in-depth and interesting presentations. And thank you to you all for joining us today. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you, everyone.